7. Military dogs surrounded the old seal at the airport. Then one word made them all obey: Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. A Friday afternoon. The place was loud, messy, full of people going in every direction. Announcements were blasting from the speakers every 2 minutes. Kids were crying. Luggage wheels were scraping across the hard floor. It was the kind of noise that gets inside your head and just stays there. Nobody was paying attention to the old man walking slowly through the crowd near Terminal D. He wasn't tall. He wasn't dressed in anything special. Just an olive green jacket, a pair of worn jeans, and old boots that looked like they had been through a lot more than just airport floors. He carried a single duffel bag on one shoulder. His hair was gray and cut short. His face had deep lines in it, the kind you get not from age, but from years of hard living and harder decisions. His name was Chief Petty Officer Thomas Harlan, retired, 71 years old, 26 years with the United States Navy SEALs. He walked with a slight limp in his right leg. He didn't complain about it. He never did. He had earned that limp the same way he had earned everything else, quietly and at great cost. He was just passing through, a connecting flight to Georgia to see his daughter. It had been almost 2 years since his last visit. He wasn't thinking about anything dramatic. He just wanted to get on the plane and sit down. He spotted the problem before he even heard it. Near Gate 34, a small crowd of travelers had formed a wide circle and backed away from the center. People were pressing against the walls. A woman was holding her child up off the ground. A TSA officer had his hand on his radio, not sure what to do. In the middle of it all, 7 military working dogs, 6 Belgian Malinois and 1 German Shepherd. All of them trained military assets. They were being transported by a Department of Defense K-9 unit, 6 handlers moving the dogs between installations. On paper, it was a routine transfer. In reality, right now, it was anything but. The dogs were not behaving. Something had set them off. Maybe it was the noise. Maybe it was the crowd. Maybe it was the recycled airport air that carried too many strange smells at once. Whatever it was, all 7 animals had gone past unsettled and into something closer to chaos. 3 of them were pulling hard against their leashes, straining forward with their full weight. 1 had already knocked a young airman sideways twice. Another was circling in tight, anxious loops, whining loudly. The handlers were trying. They were shouting commands, using hand signals, pulling back on leashes with both hands. Nothing was working. The lead handler, a sergeant first class who looked like he was in his late 20s, had turned red in the face. He was experienced, that was obvious. But experience wasn't enough right now. The dogs simply weren't listening. Duke, that's what people who knew Thomas Harlan called him, had called him for decades, stopped walking. He stood at the edge of the crowd and watched, not with panic, not with curiosity, just the steady, practiced observation of a man who had spent his entire adult life reading situations before walking into them. He watched for about 4 seconds. That was all he needed. Then he walked forward. A younger airman stepped in front of him. "Sir, please stay back, the dogs are..." Duke didn't stop walking. He didn't push the airman. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at him with those pale gray eyes, calm as still water, and the airman stepped aside without fully understanding why. The lead handler turned and saw him coming. He opened his mouth, ready to stop this civilian from doing something stupid. But something about the way the old man moved, unhurried, upright, completely without fear, made the sergeant pause. Duke walked straight into the middle of it, not around the dogs, not carefully along the edge, right into the center of 7 agitated, highly trained military animals that had already sent trained handlers scrambling. He didn't run. He didn't crouch down to make himself look smaller. He didn't hold out his hand for them to sniff. He just walked in, duffel bag still hanging on his shoulder, the same way a man walks into his own kitchen. The nearest dog, a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, with over 180 hours of combat training behind her, swung her head toward him. Her ears went stiff and straight. Her fur rose along the back of her neck. She stared at him with hard, focused eyes. Duke looked right back at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He didn't tense up. He just held her gaze with the same quiet steadiness that he had held every difficult moment in his life. Not aggressive. Not submissive. Just present. Completely, entirely present. For a moment, the whole gate seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a voice so low and even, that the handler standing 2 feet away could barely catch it. Duke said one single word. Sits. German. It means sit. The dog sat. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. She sat the way a well-trained soldier snaps to attention. Immediately. Cleanly. With total commitment. And then something happened that made the hair stand up on the back of more than a few necks in that terminal. One by one, the other 6 dogs turned toward the old man. No additional command. No hand signal. No repeat. Just one word spoken once, and the ripple of it moved through all 7 animals like a current through water. The dog that had been pulling so hard its paws were nearly off the ground stopped and sat. The one circling in anxious loops went still and sat. The big German shepherd, who had been the most aggressive of all of them, a massive animal named Voss who had growled at everyone who came within 10 feet, turned his head toward Duke, stared for a long second, and then sat down like a stone dropping into a pond. All 7 dogs, sitting, still, eyes locked on the old man. The sergeant first class stood with his mouth open. One of the younger handlers actually took a step back, like he wasn't sure what he had just witnessed was real. Nobody spoke. Duke put his duffel bag down on the floor, slowly, no sudden movements, out of habit more than anything, and then he did something that surprised everyone watching. He crouched down, his right knee protested, the way it always did, but he went down anyway, one knee at a time, until he was low enough to meet the dogs closer to their level, and then he went to work. He moved between them one by one. He wasn't performing, he wasn't showing off, he just moved through them, the way someone moves through a place they know well. He let each dog take a moment with his scent. He spoke to them in a low, steady voice, sometimes German commands, sometimes English, sometimes something that wasn't really words at all but more like a tone, a sound, a kind of steadiness that seemed to travel straight from him into the animals without needing language to carry it. He checked harnesses. He checked posture. He ran a hand along one dog's side and paused, pressing gently, watching the animal's reaction. He put his palm flat against Voss's broad head, the German shepherd who had frightened everyone, and held it there, completely still, until the dog let out a long, slow breath and lowered his chin toward the floor. 4 minutes. That was all it took. When Duke stood back up, slowly, holding his knee for just a second before straightening, all 7 dogs were calm. Ears forward, eyes soft, bodies relaxed. They looked like completely different animals from 4 minutes ago. He picked up his duffel bag, looked at the lead handler. "Third one from the left," he said quietly, nodding toward one of the Malinois. "Her back left harness strap is rubbing. She's been trying to tell someone about it for a while now. Might want to get that adjusted before you load them." The sergeant looked at the dog, then he crouched down and checked. The strap was exactly where Duke had said, worn and pressing in the wrong place. When he stood back up, the old man was already walking away, headed back toward his gate, duffel over his shoulder, the same slight limp, the same unhurried pace. "Sir," the sergeant called after him. His voice had changed. The authority was still there, but underneath it now was something else, something closer to respect. Duke slowed, turned his head slightly. "Who are you?" The old man thought about it for exactly 1 second. Then he said simply, "Nobody, just somebody who spent a long time learning how to listen." And he walked away. He made his flight with 6 minutes to spare. It came out later, after one of the younger airmen recognized the name Harlan and looked it up in a publicly available military record, that Thomas Harlan had served 3 full combat deployments alongside military working dog units. He had trained under some of the most respected K9 handlers in naval special warfare history. He had spent years learning not just the commands but the mindset, the way of carrying yourself around a working dog that told the animal, before a single word was spoken, whether the person in front of them was someone worth listening to. There was also a record, partially declassified, from a mission in Afghanistan in 2003, a province that still couldn't be fully named in public documents, a moment during a critical extraction where silence was the difference between life and death. Duke had whispered a single command to a military dog in the dark, and the dog had obeyed without a sound. 11 men had come home because of it. None of that was known to the people standing at Gate 34 that afternoon. They just saw an old man in an olive jacket walk into a storm and walk back out of it without breaking a sweat. His daughter met him at the arrivals gate in Georgia a few hours later. She hugged him for a long time, She noticed, the way she always did, that his hands were completely steady. They were always steady. That was the thing about her father. It wasn't that nothing ever got to him. It was that somewhere in all those years, he had learned something that most people spend their whole lives chasing. He had learned how to be the calmest thing in the room, and in that airport, in that crowd, with 7 frightened and agitated animals who had stopped responding to everyone around them. All it took was one man who was not afraid. One man who walked in without hesitation, without ego, without anything to prove. One man who had done the work, for decades, to earn the kind of quiet that makes even animals stop and pay attention. She asked him how the trip was. He shrugged and said it was fine. Quiet. She laughed, because that was always his word. Quiet.